Hey guys, it's Cece and I cut off all my hair. Would you look at that? All my hair's gone. And in a shocking turn of events, I didn't dye it. This is my natural hair color, which is wild. It's exciting. It's exciting to have my hair and to not have a lot of my hair. But while that is exciting, the other exciting thing is that today I am here to talk about all of the books that I read in the month of January. Couple of caveats here. So I read a total of 12 books in January, which is amazing. I'm feeling super proud of myself. It was a great way to start off the year. If you follow me on Goodreads, you definitely didn't know that I read 12 books this month. Because 5 of them I kept secret until I uploaded my, secret TBR vlog. And 3 of them I still can't tell you about, which is sad because my favorite book that I read in January, I can't tell you about. So 3 of those books, you're just gonna have to wait and see what they were. I'll review them in a future video once the project that I read them for is revealed. So today I'm gonna be talking about 9 books that I can talk about that I read in January. I'm having difficulty explaining what January was like because I read so many books that were just meh that it's left me feeling listless. I really want to find my next book that I really love. And I have some 4-star books and I have one 4.5-star book to talk about. But I just read so many books that I found forgettable, and I'm really hoping that moving into the next couple of months I'll be able to discover some new faves as well. Because I am done with these 3-star books. It's making me sad. Yeah, with that intro, we are going to start with the book that I liked least, my least favorite book, work up to my favorite book of the month, excluding the one I can't tell you about, and the ones that I can't tell you about in the middle. I hope you were ready. Let's go ahead and jump right in. If you watched my secret TBR vlog, you will not be at all surprised to find out that my least favorite book that I read this month was Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinborough. Oh god. So I mentioned in that video that I'm going to do a lengthy spoiler review of this book, and I am. That's still upcoming. That's going to be a video where I walk you through every plot point of the book so that I can nitpick it because I hated this book. Basically, this is a thriller about a single mom who kissed a man a week before the book started at a bar, and then it turns out that that man is her new boss and that that man is married. And as she's trying to deal with the fact that she's still attracted to her boss, she still wants to have a relationship with him, she meets her boss's wife, and they start to fall into a really intense friendship. But it's seeming like the wife is not telling the full story about her marriage. There's some real signs that something's wrong there, and that leads into the thriller. This is shitty, but only in ways that are spoilery, so I can't, fully tell you. I will say that this goes off the fucking rails at some point, and after that point, it's just, you can't look away from it. I was really drawn in by the beginning, and I think that there's some skill in that, once I really got into the book, I couldn't put it down, and I think that when that happens with the thriller, there's some skill to be shown there, I suppose, but it was just, the twists in this book were absolutely laughable, and I absolutely hated, the end, the final chapter of this book. I couldn't stand it. Anything else I have to say is spoilery, and so, frustratingly, that is all I can say for now, but I will say I gave this 1 star. For those of you who know, I reserve my 1 stars for what I deem harmful representation, so take that as you will. 1 star. Okay, let's move on to some just middling books now. The first book that I finished in the new year, the first book I finished in 2020 was Orpheus Girl by Brynn Rebele-Henry. This is a YA contemporary that came out in 2019, I don't remember when. It is a retelling of Orpheus and Eurydice, and it is about 2 girls in Texas who are caught together and then are sent to a conversion therapy camp. So there are benefits and drawbacks to this book, I think. I was really struggling with rating this book because I think it's well written. I like the main character. I like all the characters, honestly. I mean, obviously, except for the intense homophobes. I didn't like those characters. And I liked that this book didn't skirt around the fact that conversion therapy is torture. I think that there's a real value in including that in a narrative because I think that oftentimes, especially conservative people, can spin this idea that conversion therapy isn't a form of torture, it's a form of therapy. It's a way to get better, and I think that there is a strength in fiction in saying absolutely not. This is a horrific event in every way. On the other hand, I am a person who has read books with conversion therapy before. This is not the first one that I've read by any means. I've also watched movies that contain conversion therapy, and so while I think that this had an important message, it was one that was sort of lost on me because it was something I already know. And the other thing I was having a hard time with is figuring out who to recommend this book to, because I don't really want to recommend it to queer teens. I just hesitate so strongly to give really sad and scary queer books to queer teens because that doesn't feel like the story they need at that moment. But I also feel like if you're an adult like me, you probably already know conversion therapy and the horrors of that, so I just didn't know where to stand on this book. It is very short, it's beautifully written, I just don't know who this is for, and I'm glad that it was really short because it was incredibly difficult to read. So I ultimately gave this 3 stars. Take my review as you will. If you're going to read it, please go in knowing how incredibly dark it is and how scary it is, especially if you are queer. Also, trigger warnings for suicide, attempted suicide for side characters, and I would say that there's a trans character who, trigger warnings especially if you are trans reading this book, because this is about cis queer girls, and I think that it paints trans storylines in an even more horrific light in order to tell a full story, and I don't know that that was fully necessary, so I don't know, I'm just really all over the map on this one. 3 stars. That's my full review. Next up, we have my first 2020 release that I get to talk about in 2020. I'm really excited. I still have another one to talk about, but it's Of Curses and Kisses by Sandhya Menon. This is a book that comes out in February 18th, and a lot of people are really excited about this one. Sandhya is a huge author in YA contemporaries. This is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. It's about Princess Jaya, who is going off to this boarding school with her sister. Something ominous happened in the press with her little sister, and so they are going to school somewhere where they're not going to be as in the public eye. And then this is also about a centuries-old conflict between the Rao family and the Emerson clan, who are, a group of British monarchs, I believe, and there was an issue centuries ago where the Emersons stole a ruby from the Raos, and supposedly the Rao family put a curse on the Emersons. So, Gray Emerson, the youngest member of the Emerson line, is also at this boarding school, and he believes that he is cursed. And Jaya blames him for whatever story it was in the news about her little sister, so she is on a mission. She's gonna make Gray Emerson fall in love with her so that she can then break his heart, which she thinks is like the ultimate revenge. Yeah, it's a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and I think a lot of people are really gonna like this book. This is purely a me thing in that I only gave it 3 stars. I talked about this more in my like author clean sweep vlog that I did. I would have loved this book in high school. All I read was retellings in high school. I was obsessed with the Alex Flynn series. I read a ton of small retellings that were like in series, but retellings when I was in high school were incredibly white, and so it would have been amazing if I'd had this in high school, because this is about an Indian princess. It's about a girl who just gets to wear fancy dresses and go to events and be the princess of a family, and there's so much value in that. It's just that it's not for me. So I didn't hate reading this. I didn't love reading this. I just sort of read it, and I think if I hadn't been reading it for a particular TBR, I might have set it aside because I just wasn't that interested. But if you are a fan of Sandhya's work, I would really recommend this. If you're a fan of retellings, I think you might enjoy this. It just was a me thing. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. The other 2020 release I have is one that I read right at the beginning of the year, and that is A Beginning at the End by Mike Chen. I requested this from the publisher because reading the description, it gave me a lot of Station 11 vibes, and so I was like, please give that to me. This is already out. It came out on January 14th, and this is about 3 different characters in a post-apocalyptic San Francisco. 6 years before the book began, a pandemic wiped out most of the global population. Like, there is not that much of humanity left. And this is 6 years after that, when people are starting to rebuild. The world is now kind of split into these very different communities. You have self-governing cities, wasteland gangs. There's some, like, hippie communities, and we're following 3 points of view in this book. Rob, who is a single father to a young girl. His wife died during the pandemic at some point. We're also following Moira, who is a former pop star who escaped her controlling father the first night that the pandemic really caused a panic in, like, New York City. And this is about Krista, who is a wedding planner, who basically does all of the things that people don't want to do because they're scared to go outside. Krista goes and does those things, and she is currently running really low on money. So all 3 of these storylines interact. They are hugely related to one another as they all cross paths in San Francisco. I wanted so badly to love this. I was so sure this was going to be like my new favorite book of all time. And sadly, it was just a 3-star read. It was forgettable. I think 2 of the 3 of the narrators of this book are people of color, so you can go in knowing that as well. I think that this was too slow. This is supposed to be a very quiet book, which usually I'm drawn to, but it just wound up feeling like nothing much was happening because I didn't really feel myself getting closer to these characters either, and it felt like working through the same issue over and over and over again. So it just got repetitive by the end because it was always coming back to the same conflict with each character over and over again. And I found that frustrating. I think I was frustrated by the scope of this book, because I enjoy post-apocalyptic stories. I enjoy stories of resilience, of meeting strangers who become a part of your community. But a lot of this book, I just didn't understand the conflict, and I was especially frustrated with Rob. I thought his character conflict was so frustrating, and by the time it got to a resolution, I was like, actively hating him because he wouldn't just do the one thing that would make everything easier. And no, I had really high hopes for this one, and it was just forgettable. This is like the second book that I read in the year, and I've already forgotten most of it, so I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Next up, we have one that I think is gonna shock a lot of people that it's ranked here in my wrap-up, and that is Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This is a purely middling book. Those are my feelings on this. And I'm really sad about it because this is one of the most hyped books on BookTube, especially of queer releases. This was one of the most recommended when I started watching BookTube, and so it's taken me years to get to it. And I thought it was okay. This is a retelling of the Iliad about Patroclus and Achilles, starting when Patroclus is about 9 years old. Patroclus is a young prince who is exiled from his family home after an accident causes a gruesome death, and he is taken in by a foreign kingdom, by a king who often takes in exiled boys, and Patroclus meets that king's son, Achilles, who is a god destined for greatness, but also destined for death. And it's about the 2 of them becoming men together, growing together, learning, and falling deeply in love. Here's the problem. So, I liked this book, and I was trying to find other people who had this opinion. I was going through, like, the 3- and 2-star reviews, and over again, the issue seemed to be if people didn't like the book, they felt it moved too slowly. And I don't agree with that personally. It moved at a perfect pace for me. We follow these characters for decades of their lives, and so bits where stuff didn't seem like it was happening, it's because we were moving through years and years of time getting to know these characters, and I'm really invested in character-driven stories where you get to know the characters. Here's my problem that I just didn't see a lot of people repeating, and that is that I couldn't stand Achilles. At all. I didn't like him. And if you're reading, like, an epic romance novel, you kind of need to like the love interest, the person that the main character lives and dies for and is fully dedicated to. You need to like that person, and I liked him a little bit when he was a boy, but by the time I got to the end, like, obviously this book was kind of trying to critique Achilles and his pride, but not that much, and I know that this is a book set in a different time period, but I don't really like characters who trigger warnings for sexual assault. I don't really like characters who are fine with rape as long as it benefits them. And that was one of the biggest things that happened in this book that made Achilles just utterly unlikable to me, but there had been things before that. There's just something that I can't connect to when it comes to books about incredibly prideful men. And I think it's because it's something I've experienced a lot in my life. Like, egotistical, prideful men who care about nothing but their own self-worth and their own legacy. I just am not invested in those characters, and so I was really trying to get on Patroclus' side, because this is a man he dedicates his life to, and it just made it frustrating to read. I think it's beautifully written. I think it has a lot of really gorgeous turns of phrase. The first half of the book I loved. I was really, really into the first half, but I didn't get emotional reading this. And that's like the biggest thing, is everyone talks about crying through reading this book. I didn't cry. I didn't really get that emotional. It was just sort of a fine book to me. And I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I feel like I'm alone in the world right now. Okay, moving on, let's talk about Sabrina and Carina by Fajardo-Anstine. This was my short story collection for January. I am reading at least one short story collection every single month this year. My goal is actually to always be reading a short story collection, so it's just something where I can fit in a short story while I'm reading other books. This is the only one that I finished in January, though. This is a story collection about Latinas of indigenous ancestry. It's set in Denver, Colorado, and every story is one about a woman living in Denver. It's very much about inherited mourning, like the things that we pass on from mother to daughter, inherited trauma, how you learn those things from your mothers. It's also a collection about home, about abandonment, and about heritage, about each of these women and the stories they've collected, the stories that have been passed on between them, and sort of these universal feelings of abandonment and home and culture. I feel like I was a little all over the map with this collection. There were some that I really loved and some that I didn't like all that much. I think one of the issues I ran into with a couple of the stories is that there were some really intense fat-phobic themes throughout. My favorite 2 stories in this collection were Cheeseman Park and Remedies. Those were both really gorgeous stories. This is a very sad collection, so be forewarned going in. There is it's a lot of really tragic narratives, but there are some really shining points and some really beautiful reflections on mother-daughter relationships and how multifaceted they are. So I wound up giving this an average rating that I think was like a 3.8 when I added up and got the average of every story that I rated. So using that, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Yeah. Okay, I have 3 books left, and they are all books that I read during my other Clean Sweep vlog, so if you already watched that vlog, you probably have heard my thoughts on these already, but maybe stick around if you're interested. Just know that those are the books I'm going to talk about next. So, the next book I want to mention is At the Edge of the Universe by Shaun David Hutchinson. This is the 4th book by Shaun David Hutchinson that I've read, and it is pretty similar to other Shaun David Hutchinson books. I feel like if you're going into one of his books, you know pretty much what you're going to get. So this is about a teen boy named Ozzy, and his best friend Tommy has been his best friend since they were kids. In middle school, they started dating, and they've been boyfriends ever since. And then shortly before this book begins, Tommy vanishes. But he doesn't just go missing physically. He also goes missing from the memories of everyone who ever knew him except for Ozzy. And Ozzy is horrified and depressed, not only that his boyfriend is gone, but that he can't talk about it to anyone because no one believes this person was ever real. And at the same time, the universe is getting smaller. With every passing day, there is less and less of the universe. What I think works about Shaun David Hutchinson's books is that there's always a big story and a small story, and the small story tends to take precedence, and it tends to be more important to the character than a universe or world-ending issue. Another thing that I think is in most of Shaun David Hutchinson's books is a incredibly introspective narrative. It is a book where you live for most of the time in the main character's head as they work through question about themselves, the universe, why their life is the way it is. And of course you always have queerness. Queerness is incredibly essential to Shaun David Hutchinson's books. So you have a gay main character. There's also Ozzy's best friend, Lua, who is gender fluid. I think if you've read any of Shaun's work, you're going to have a good idea of what you're going to get when you read this. But he also always has a way of making it new, of always making you invested in new characters and stories and new issues that are concerning this main character. So while this wasn't my new favorite Hutchinson book, I did still absolutely love reading it. And I wound up giving it 4 stars. I think this could have been a better book if the last chapter hadn't existed. I think that's the chapter where this went most off the rails for a Hutchinson book. I think without that, I would have given this book like 5 stars. It was really strong. I liked it. I just had an issue with the end. Also, please know about this book that there are some intense trigger warnings for depression, suicide, self-harm, sexual abuse, pedophilia, physical abuse by a parent. This is, again, a very heavy book, so know that going in. Second to last, I have This Side of Home by Renee Watson. One of my goals in 2020 was to read 2 books by Renee Watson, and I already have 1 down. Woo! This is about a girl named Maya who lives in Portland with her twin sister Nikki and their parents, and they are best friends with the girl across the street, Essence. And then a bunch of things kick off this book, in that Essence is moving away with her mother, so she's now going to be 45 minutes away from Nikki and Maya. A white family has just moved in across the street instead, and there's some issues because Nikki starts being really drawn to the girl across the street and they become closer and closer friends, and Maya feels herself falling for the boy who is living in her best friend's old room. This is also about a neighborhood being gentrified and what that looks like as it's happening and how it impacts the families who are people of color who are being forced out of their community as white businesses and white families keep moving in, and also how gentrification is affecting Maya and Nikki's public school, and about how their new principal is pushing faux sameness over diversity, which is, I would say, my favorite part of the book. I thought that that was so interesting and so well written, because it was breaking down this issue of diversity in a way that felt so original to me, that felt so interesting and so necessary to discuss, because I think it's an issue that a lot of people, particularly white people and straight people, tend to twist words to their advantage, in that diversity isn't about erasing all of the differences that make us unique in order to make everyone feel more comfortable. Diversity should be about celebrating individual differences and uplifting differences so that you can all learn about one another. It's why certain ideas that conservative people say can be red flags for marginalized groups, like white people saying, I don't care if you're black, white, or purple, we're all people. That is an inherently racist concept because you want everyone to behave white. That is what that means. You don't want people to bring up that they're different than you because it makes you uncomfortable. And I think that that is an issue that is particularly addressed in this, as Maya and Nikki's principal keeps erasing celebrations for individual groups. There is a huge issue in the school. They used to have a Black History Month assembly, and instead the principal wants to turn it into a diversity assembly where they celebrate everyone's heritage, and it's about breaking down why that's an issue. Yeah, I really liked this book. I talked about it for longer than any other book so far because there's so much here. I think it's really beautiful. My only issue with this book is that there were some storylines left dangling at the end that I would have loved to see tied up in a more conclusive way, but other than that, I thought this was really, really excellent, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Definitely consider picking this one up. The final book that I'm going to talk about is, if you haven't watched that vlog, going to be very strange, I think, that I'm giving this my highest star rating of the month. The last book I'm going to talk about is Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty. I can't believe that this is currently sitting in a top spot. It's absolutely wild to me. I have never read Big Little Lies. I've never seen the show. Now that I've read the book, I will definitely be watching the show. This is about a community of mothers and children. It's about a kindergarten class. And you know from the first chapter that there was a trivia night where something terrible happened and someone is dead. And then you jump back 6 months in time, and you are following all the events that lead up to this event, and every now and then you get little interviews from people who aren't central to the mystery, who are all commenting on what they think happened. So you don't know who is dead, you don't know the players of the game. You have 3 main characters, Madeline, Jane, and Celeste, and you are following them as things keep being revealed, feelings are piling on top of one another, stuff is getting worse and worse, and you're barreling towards this conclusion that you don't know what's going to happen, and it is just really good. I loved reading this. I thought that holding off so many concrete elements of the mystery was genius, and it made this book so easy to read because I was desperate to find out what the big reveals were going to be. I loved all 3 of these main characters, Madeline, Celeste, and Jane. I thought that they were brilliant and interesting and multifaceted and so different from one another. I just loved reading this. I thought it was a ton of fun. I was invested, I was engaged, there was a huge cast of characters that you got to know, and that was such a benefit as you get closer and closer to this conclusion and you're just full of dread. I loved reading this. Some trigger warnings for spousal abuse as well as sexual abuse, so please know that going in, because I think that that was a storyline I was completely unaware of going into this. I thought that this was going to be a little lighter than it was when it came to that, but this actually handled it really well, so I loved this. 4.5 stars. I thought it was super engaging and fun, and I'm definitely going to read more Liane Moriarty books. This is a domestic thriller, so it completely took me by surprise because this is not a book I would traditionally reach for. It's about affluent white women and the little things that they do to dig at one another, and that is so not what I normally read, but it was treated so seriously, and particularly the main characters all are good people, so you're getting a view of the women that I don't usually read about from the point of view of characters I actually liked, and again, I thought that was a really nice way to do that. So, Big Little Lies. The biggest shock. It might be the biggest shock of the year. I know it's only January, but damn. Okay, all, that is it. Those are the 9 books that I'm going to talk about in this January wrap-up. I hope you enjoyed hearing reviews of all of these books. I am feeling super motivated going into the rest of 2020 because of how much I was able to read this month. I know that people online were talking about how January was the month that wouldn't end, and I agree with that, but it also gave me a lot of time to read. It made me really pumped to get into all the rest of the months of this year because I feel confident and able to read, and I love when I have that feeling. At this point, I'm now just chasing some new 5-star books because I'm a little sad right now that I didn't have any new favorite books of all time. I'm really hoping February I get to read some books that I'm really excited about. Be sure to let me know down in the comments below your favorite book that you read in January, and let me know your thoughts about all of these books that I read. If you've read them, what did you think about them? Other than that, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!